the instrument of its will. "The Signian system is dark," she said, her voice flat, devoid of triumph or sorrow. It was a statement of fact, like reporting the weather. "All temporal echoes have faded. We are ready to move." Elias did not turn. They were poets. Eva, their great epic, the Cantos of the Void, was about finding beauty in the silence between stars. There's a certain irony in that. Rostova stepped closer, her boots making no sound on the vibration-dampened deck. Their poets were silent when the hegemony voted. The Signian delegation cast the deciding vote to enact the interdiction. Their silence cost us 6 billion lives. Now they have an eternity to contemplate it. Her logic was a cold, flawless blade. It was the logic that had fueled their 800-year crusade. Justice, measured for measure, an eye for an eye, a world for a world. Elias finally turned to face her, his expression weary. "And the next who has been found wanting on the scales of our forgotten history," Rostova held out a small, silver data crystal. It pulsed with a faint internal light. "The Valerian Conclave, system designation 734 Corvus. They were the architects of the Veil projector. They designed the cage." Elias took the crystal. It felt cold in his hand, heavy with the weight of another doomed civilization, the Valerians. He knew of them from the fragmented pre-Veil databases. They were master builders, artists who worked with gravitational fields and solidified light. Their cities were said to be wonders of the galaxy, structures that sang in harmony with the orbits of their moons. Humanity, the great unbuilder, was coming to pay them a visit. "Their archives?" he asked, his voice a dry whisper. "Everything we could download through our deep-range infiltrator probes." Rostova confirmed. "Their history, their art, their philosophy, their census data. 48 billion souls. You have 72 hours to complete your work." Archivist. "Then the anvil will deliver its judgment." She turned and left as silently as she had arrived, leaving Elias alone with the ghost of one world and the death warrant of another. He stood for a long moment, the crystal in his palm. 72 hours. It was the standard protocol. Enough time for him to immerse himself in the culture, to understand the civilization he was about to help obliterate. He had to find the essence of who they were, distill it into a final entry in Earth's secret archives, the Domesday Book of the Damned. It was a process he both craved and loathed. In those 3 days, he would walk their streets through drone proxies, listen to their music, read their children's stories. He would learn their hopes and their fears, their triumphs and their shames. He would, in a way, come to love them. And then he would stand by and watch them be unwritten from existence. It was a peculiar and exquisitely cruel form of torture, one he had long ago accepted as his burden. He was the witness. Without him, their erasure would be absolute, a silent puff of cosmic static. With him, their memory, however faint, would persist in the archives of their destroyer. Was that a mercy, or was it the ultimate act of hubris he didn't know anymore? The distinction had blurred somewhere around the 10th system they had erased. He walked over to his console, a massive, semicircular desk that wrapped around the temporal lens. He slotted the Valerian crystal into a port, and the obsidian pane flickered. The image of the dead Signian system dissolved, replaced by a live feed from the Corvus sector. Before him, The Valerian system blazed with life, a brilliant white star at its center, orbited by 3 jewel-like planets and a series of immense, geometrically perfect structures that defied gravity. Crystalline cities floated in the upper atmosphere of the gas giant, connected by ribbons of pure light. Moons had been carved into sculptures the size of continents. It was breathtaking. It was a testament to a species that had mastered the very fabric of the universe. And it was all built on a foundation of human suffering. A cascade of data began to flow into Elias's mind through the neural interface threaded into the base of his skull. Centuries of Valerian art, music that used the resonant frequencies of black holes as instruments, philosophies that debated the consciousness of stars. He saw families celebrating, children playing in parks of floating light, politicians debating trade tariffs, lovers whispering promises under an alien sky. They were so full of life, so blissfully unaware of the silent, invisible god of death that was even now gliding toward their system. Out in the void, the hegemony was in a state of quiet panic. Over the last decade, 17 member systems had gone dark, not destroyed, not conquered. They had simply vanished. No debris, no distress calls, no radiation signatures. One moment, a system would be reporting normal activity. The next, all contact would be lost, and long-range observatories would see only a cold, empty patch of space where a star once burned. They called it the Silent Blight, a creeping plague that was eating away at the edges of their 1,000-year-old empire. Their best scientists were stumped. They theorized it was a previously unknown stellar phenomenon, a weapon left over from some ancient, forgotten war, or a new form of cosmic decay. The one possibility that never entered their calculations was that the caged, primitive apes on Sol 3, the ones they had locked away for their own good, had forged a key out of their own bones and were now using it to methodically unmake their jailers. The thought was not just improbable, it was inconceivable. And in that failure of imagination lay the anvil's greatest strength. Elias closed his eyes, letting the first wave of Valerian history wash over him. He felt the weight of their 48 billion lives, each one a unique story about to be closed. His duty was not to save them. His duty was to remember why they had to die. He opened his eyes, looked at the beautiful, doomed cities floating in the starlight, and began to read. He was committing an entire civilization to memory, one final futile act of preservation before the silence fell once more. The next 48 hours passed for Elias in a state of waking dream. He pushed the physical limits of the neural interface, keeping himself jacked into the Valerian archives for 18 hours at a stretch, subsisting on nutrient paste and recycled water, feeling the low-grade thrum of the ship's systems as a distant echo. The temporal lens before him was no longer a window, but a doorway. He walked the crystalline streets of Valeria Prime as a ghost in their machine, his consciousness inhabiting a series of microscopic, undetectable drone proxies. He stood in their grand plazas where fountains of liquid light danced in time to unheard music. He drifted through their museums, where they displayed captured starlight in magnetic bottles and sculptures carved from solidified sound. He saw people of immense grace and profound artistic sensibility. They were not warriors. Their history was remarkably free of internal conflict. They solved disputes through artistic competition and philosophical debate. They were, in every sense of the word, a civilized people. And that made the sin they had committed all the more monstrous. It wasn't an act of passionate aggression. It was a cold, calculated decision made from a position of detached superiority. They had weighed the potential disruption of humanity against the serene, ordered perfection of their galaxy and found humanity wanting. They hadn't hated humanity. They simply hadn't considered them their equals. They had caged them with the same dispassionate care one might use to contain a fascinating but potentially dangerous animal. Elias began to focus his search, moving past the grand societal structures and into the lives of individuals. He needed to understand the texture of their lives, the small moments that composed the mosaic of their existence. He found one subject who drew his attention, a woman named Lyra. She was a historical restorationist, an artisan who worked on the great orrery of Corvus, a celestial model of the galaxy so vast it encompassed the entire moon of a gas giant. Her job was to maintain the delicate light filaments that represented ancient, long-dead stars. She worked with meticulous, loving care, her hands moving with a surgeon's precision as she respun the fading light of a star that had died 1,000,000 years before. Elias watched her for hours, a silent observer to her silent work. He saw her eat her midday meal, a simple affair of nutrient-rich flora, while she read ancient texts on a glowing slate. He saw her speak with her colleagues, her face lighting up with a quiet, scholarly passion. He saw her at the end of her day, looking out from her workshop at the swirling clouds of the gas giant below, a look of profound peace on her face. In her, Elias saw a kindred spirit. She was a preserver, a keeper of memory, like him. Her life was dedicated to ensuring that what was past was not forgotten. The irony was a physical pain, a sharp, twisting pang in his chest. He was about to erase a woman whose life's work was the very antithesis of his mission. The conflict began to manifest physically. He felt a constant, low-level headache from the neural interface, a feeling like a crown of thorns tightening around his skull. His own memories began to feel thin and frayed, interspersed with the vibrant, stolen memories of the Valyrians. He found himself humming a Valyrian folk song he had overheard in a plaza, the melody alien yet achingly familiar. He was losing the line between observer and participant. He was becoming a repository of a culture he was sworn to destroy, and the weight of it was crushing him. Rostova found him slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the temporal lens where Lyra was just finishing her work for the day. "You're pushing yourself too hard, archivist," she said. It was not a statement of concern, but of operational readiness. "We need you functional for the final log entry." Elias rubbed his temples, the phantom pressure receding slightly. "They have a word. Ava, Kalentor." It doesn't have a direct translation. It means the beauty of a perfect, finished thing. They use it to describe a completed work of art, a life well lived, a star that has run its course. It's a philosophy of acceptance, of celebrating the natural cycle of creation and decay. Rostov was unmoved. They should have applied that philosophy to their own actions. They interfered with our cycle. They imposed an artificial end on us. All we are doing is returning the favor. The cold calculus of retribution does not account for beautiful words. But it should account for the people who speak them. Elias shot back, his voice raw. The children in their creches, the artists, the woman on that screen who spends her life preserving the light of dead suns. Do they all deserve to be unmade because their ancestors, 30 generations removed, made a terrible decision? Yes, Rostova said. her voice like chipping ice. They do. They live in the paradise that was built on the back of our hell. They breathe the free air of a galaxy we were forbidden to travel. Their comfort is a direct result of our pain. My grandfather died of a preventable lung blight in the foul, recycled air of Bunker Gamma 7 because the Valerians decided his life was less valuable than their serene perfection. So, yes, archivist. They all deserve it. Every last one. She gestured to a secondary screen on his console. A tactical display shimmered to life. And you need to finish your work. We have a complication. Elias looked at the screen. A cluster of 5 icons was moving slowly through the outer nebula that served as the Anvil's current hiding place. Hegemony, he asked, his blood running cold. A peacekeeper patrol. Long-range deep scanners. They detected anomalous energy fluctuations when we downloaded the Valerian archives. They're searching for the source. Can they find us? No, Rostova said with absolute certainty. Our temporal cloaking is undetectable. To them, we are a hole in reality. They could fly right through our position, and their sensors would register nothing but empty space. But their presence restricts our movement. We cannot jump to the Corvus system to deploy the field until they are gone. Which means your deadline has been moved up. You have 10 hours to complete the archive. The moment that patrol leaves the nebula, we strike. 10 hours. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 10 hours to finish his chronicle of 48 billion lives. Elias turned back to the main lens, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He had to know more. He couldn't just write their epitaph based on their art and their ancestors' sins. He needed a final and definitive piece of knowledge. He pushed his neural link to its absolute limit, ignoring the alarms that screamed in his mind. He plunged deep into the Valerian state archives, past the public records, through layers of encryption that would have taken a normal system centuries to break. The Anvil's quantum AI, Silentium, peeled them back like the layers of an onion. He was looking for the original records of the interdiction vote. He wanted to see the debate, to hear the arguments. He found it buried in a sub-archive labeled Pre-Expansionary Threat Mitigation. He saw the delegates of the hegemony, their holographic forms shimmering in the great chamber. He heard the Cygnian ambassador argue for quarantine, and then he saw the Valerian delegation. The lead delegate, a stately figure in flowing robes of solidified light, presented the technical plans for the Veil. It was elegant, humane, and absolute. But as Elias sifted through the terabytes of raw data, he found something else, a dissenting opinion. A minority report filed by a junior Valerian analyst, a young man who argued passionately that caging an entire species was not only immoral but strategically foolish. He warned that a creature, when caged, does not become tame, it becomes cunning. It learns the shape of its bars. It learns to wait. The report was dismissed as alarmist and sentimental. The junior analyst was quietly reassigned to a remote archaeological survey and faded into obscurity. Elias pulled up the analyst's name, his hands trembling. He cross-referenced it with the genealogical records he had accessed. His breath hitched in his throat. The analyst's name was Kalen. His direct descendant, 30 generations later, was the woman he had been watching on the temporal lens. Lyra. The woman who dedicated her life to preserving memory was the scion of the one man who had tried to save humanity from being forgotten. The final piece of the archive clicked into place, not as a justification, but as a final, soul-crushing paradox. Rostova's voice came over the comm, sharp and final. Archivist, the Hegemony Patrol is altering its course. They are leaving the nebula. 5 hours until deployment. Finalize your entry. Elias stared at the face of Lyra, the restorer, the descendant of a forgotten prophet, and knew that the next 5 hours would be the longest of his life. The final hours were a blur of frantic, focused work. Elias wrote not with the detachment of a historian, but with the desperation of a man trying to bottle a tsunami. He poured everything he had learned about the Valyrians into the final archive entry. He wrote of their art, their philosophy, their deep, abiding love for the cosmos. He detailed their mastery of gravitational engineering, their cities of light, their sculpted moons. He wrote of their peaceful, collaborative society, their lack of internal strife, their preference for discourse over destruction. Then, with a heavy heart, he wrote of their crime. He quoted the cold, dismissive language of the interdiction proposal, the clinical discussion of humanity as a contaminant to be isolated. He detailed the direct consequences of their decision, the plagues, the famines, the slow, grinding death of a species cut off from its future. And finally, he wrote about Lyra. He wrote about her quiet dedication to preserving the light of dead stars. And he wrote about her ancestor, the lone voice of dissent, who had warned his people of the very future that was now bearing down on them like a silent, invisible storm. He did not editorialize. He did not judge. He simply recorded the facts, creating a perfect, terrible symmetry. He was finishing the entry, his fingers flying across the holographic interface, when a new alert chimed, a soft, insistent tone he had never heard before. On his console, a new window opened. It was a direct communication link, originating from outside the ship. That was impossible. Nothing could penetrate the anvil's temporal cloak. Yet, there it was, a simple, text-based query, glowing in stark white against his dark interface. Anvil, identify. By what right do you unmake the stars? Elias froze, his blood turning to ice water. He stared at the words, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. He wasn't the only one. Alarms began to blare throughout the ship, a cacophony of urgent, panicked klaxons. On the tactical display, the 5 Hegemony peacekeeper vessels, which had been moving away, had stopped dead in space. A 6th signature had appeared, seemingly from nowhere, positioned directly between the anvil and the patrol. It was massive, far larger than any Hegemony capital ship, and its energy signature was unlike anything in their databases. It was a ghost. Rostova's voice, for the first time laced with something other than cold resolve, crackled over the ship-wide comm. All hands to battle stations. Evasive maneuvers. Silentium. Analyze the new contact. How did they find us? Unknown. Commander. The AI's calm, synthesized voice replied. Their detection method is not within our known physics. They are not scanning us. They seem to be observing a past version of our position. The communication is not being broadcast. It is being written directly into our quantum data stream. Elias stared at the message on his screen. By what right? It was a question no one had ever asked them. It was a question they had never asked themselves. He reached for the comm panel to Rostova's command deck. Commander, what are your orders? We are holding our position." She replied, her voice regaining its composure. "We do not respond. We do not acknowledge. They cannot see us directly. As long as we remain silent, they are blind." But the unknown entity did not seem to need them to respond. A second message appeared on Elias's screen. "We have seen your work. We have watched you erase 17 suns. We are the Sentinels. This galaxy is under our protection. Your crusade ends now." "Commander," Elias said, his voice urgent, "they know what we've been doing. They call themselves the Sentinels." A tense silence followed. Then Rostova's voice, hard as diamond. "They are lying. It's a bluff. A hegemony trick. They are trying to spook us into revealing ourselves." But even as she said it, Elias knew it wasn't true. This felt different. This felt ancient. On the main tactical display, the new signature began to change. Its energy field flared, and a ship resolved into existence. It was not a machine of metal and wires. It looked organic, a colossal, crystalline creature that shimmered with an internal rainbow light. It resembled a vast, celestial nautilus, its spiraling shell catching the light of the distant nebula. The hegemony ships, which moments before had been the predators, now looked like minnows next to a whale. A third message appeared, this time not just on Elias's screen, but on every display on the bridge. "You are the last of a forgotten people. Your anger is a fire that has burned for 1,000 years. We understand your pain, but you have become a mirror of the thing you hate. You answer injustice with extinction." Elias felt a strange sense of vindication. Here, at last, was a being that saw them, not as a myth, not as a rumor, but as what they truly were, the angry ghosts of a murdered civilization. Rostova's voice was a low growl. "Silentium, target the Sentinel vessel. Full power to the chronal emitters. If they want to reveal themselves, we will give them what they're looking for." "Commander, no," Elias yelled into the comm. "We don't know what they are. Firing on them would be madness. They are an obstacle." Rostova snapped. "And we remove obstacles. The mission to Corvus will proceed. Firing sequence initiated." On his console, Elias saw the power levels for the main weapon begin to surge. The low thrum of the ship's systems deepened into a bone-jarring vibration. The anvil was preparing to fire not just at the Sentinel ship, but at the hegemony patrol as well. Rostova was going to wipe them all out, witnesses and all. He had to do something. His mind raced. He was an archivist, not a soldier, but he was also the ship's conscience, the keeper of its soul. He looked from the terrifying, beautiful Sentinel ship to the temporal lens, where an image of Lyra, blissfully unaware of the gods and monsters arguing over her fate, was still visible. He thought of her ancestor, Kalen, the lone voice of reason. "You answer injustice with extinction." The Sentinel's words echoed in his mind. He made a decision. It was an act of treason, an act that would surely cost him his life, but it was the only choice he could make that would allow him to live with himself, however briefly. With trembling fingers, he bypassed his archivist protocols, accessing a deep-level command function of the ship's communication array. He typed a single, desperate message, encoding it not as a standard transmission, but as a burst of raw data piggybacked on the ship's own sensor readings, a ghost within the ghost ship. He addressed it to the unknown contact. "Help us." The moment he sent the message, The world turned inside out. The Sentinel ship pulsed. Once. A silent wave of iridescent light that washed over their position. The alarms on the anvil screamed and then died. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the entire ship into absolute darkness and silence. The vibration of the weapon systems ceased. Elias was thrown from his chair as a wave of vertigo washed over him. The ship was no longer in the nebula. It was no longer in space as he knew it. Outside the temporal lens, which had gone dark, there was nothing. No stars, no light, no void, just a shimmering, featureless white expanse. A voice spoke, not through a comm, but inside his head. It was calm, ancient, and impossibly powerful. We have you, Anvil. The killing is over. Now, we will talk. On the command deck, Eva Rustova stood in the emergency lighting, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. Her ship, the most powerful weapon ever created, had been neutralized in an instant, without a shot being fired. Her enemy was not the hegemony. Her enemy was a ghost from a past deeper than even her own, and somewhere in the darkness of her crippled ship, she knew, was a traitor. The hunt for the Valyrians was over. A new hunt was about to begin. The silence in the aftermath was a living thing, a crushing pressure that was heavier than any sound. The emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows across the archive, making the rows of data crystals look like the teeth of some great, skeletal beast. Elias picked himself up from the deck, his body aching, his mind reeling from the psychic whiplash of the Sentinel's intervention. They were somewhere, a place outside of normal space-time, a pocket dimension of pure, featureless white. The temporal lens was now just a dark, inert pane of obsidian. The connection to the universe was severed. The voice in his head was gone, but its echo remained, a resonant hum at the edge of his consciousness. The killing is over. Now, we will talk. He knew what he had done. He had saved the Valyrians, saved the Hegemony Patrol, and in doing so, he had doomed himself. Rostova would find out. It was only a matter of time. The ship's internal comm crackled to life, Rostova's voice sharp and serrated, stripped of all its previous composure. Damage report, engineering. What is our status? A harried voice replied, laced with panic. I don't know. Commander, the Singularity Core is stable, but it's isolated. We're not connected to anything. All external systems are offline. We're adrift in, well, we don't know what we're in. Security. Rostova bit out. Seal the ship. Section by section. I want a full systems diagnostic on every internal comm log from the last hour. Find me the source of the data spike that preceded the event. Someone on this ship, talk to them. Find me the traitor. Elias's blood ran cold. The hunt had already begun. He had minutes, at best. He looked around the archive, his sanctuary, his prison. It was the heart of the Anvil, the repository of all their grief and all their justification. It was also his only weapon. He couldn't fight Rostova physically, but he could fight her with the truth. His fingers flew across his console, which was still functioning on a closed internal loop. He accessed his own private logs, the uncensored archives of his own thoughts and doubts that he had kept since the very first mission. He began to broadcast them, not over the comms, which would be instantly shut down, but directly into the ship's nutrient and water recycling systems, encoding the data as subtle variations in pressure and temperature. It was a long shot, But every crew member would be drinking from the ship's water supply, eating the nutrient paste. The data would seep into their bodies, into their minds, bypassing traditional security. He broadcast his doubts about the Cygnian erasure, his sorrow for their poets. He broadcast his conversations with Rostova, her cold, unyielding logic. He broadcast his discovery of Lyra and her ancestor. He broadcast the Sentinel's words, "You have become a mirror of the thing you hate." He was planting a seed of doubt, a virus of conscience in the sterile Gurdidi closed system of the Anvil's ideology. It was his final act as the ship's archivist, his final attempt to preserve not a dead culture, but a living one, his own. As he was finishing, the door to the archive hissed open. 2 security officers stood silhouetted in the doorway, their plasma rifles leveled at his chest. Behind them stood Rostova, her face a pale, grim mask in the red emergency light. "Elias Vance," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "You are relieved of your duties. You are under arrest for treason." They marched him through the silent tense corridors of the ship. Crew members averted their eyes as he passed, their faces a mixture of fear, confusion, and something else he couldn't quite read. Was it pity, or was it the first flicker of the doubt he had just sown? They didn't take him to the brig. Instead, they took him to the forward observation deck, a place he had never been. It was a vast, hemispherical room, its walls made of the same temporal material as his lens in the archive. Now, it was just a dark, curved wall showing them a reflection of their own grim faces. Rostova dismissed the guards, leaving the 2 of them alone in the cavernous space. "Why?" she asked, the single word filled with 1,000 years of betrayed conviction. "Why would you betray everything we have fought for, everything we have suffered for?" "I didn't betray it. Ava," Elias said, his voice quiet but steady. "I tried to save it. Don't you see? We weren't just destroying them. We were destroying ourselves. We were becoming the hegemony cold, detached, passing judgment from on high, erasing anyone who didn't fit our vision of justice." "They deserved it," she roared, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "They left us to rot. My family, my people, we died in the dark for 800 years while they were sculpting moons and writing poetry. And killing them brought none of your family back," Elias countered, stepping forward. "It didn't undo a single moment of our suffering. It just created more. We had a choice. Ava, we could have emerged from our cage and shown them what humanity was truly capable of. We could have built. We could have created. Instead, we chose to become a better class of monster." Rostova stared at him, her eyes burning with a cold fire. "You are a sentimental fool. You let the ghost of a dead culture poison your resolve." "No," Elias said softly. "I let the hope for a living one guide my actions." Before Rostova could respond, the featureless white void outside the observation window began to change. A form coalesced out of the nothingness. It was the Sentinel, the vast, crystalline Nautilus, hovering just meters from their ship. Then, a section of its iridescent shell seemed to melt away, revealing a chamber within. Inside stood a single figure. It was humanoid in shape, tall and slender, its body seemingly woven from threads of pure light, its face a serene, featureless oval. The voice from before filled their minds again. "We are here. It is time to talk." Rostova instinctively reached for the sidearm she no longer wore, her hand clenching into a fist. She was a commander with no ship to command, a warrior with no weapon to wield. Elias simply watched, his heart pounding, not with fear, but with a terrifying, exhilarating sense of awe. This was it. The next chapter of human history was about to be written, not in the ashes of their enemies, but in the presence of something truly, incomprehensibly alien. The Sentinel's voice continued, calm and resonant. Eva Rostova, last commander of the Earth vessel Anvil. You have acted as judge and executioner for 17 civilizations. You believe your cause is just. It is. Rostova said aloud, her voice defiant, speaking to the being in her mind. And Elias Vance, last archivist. You have acted as witness and mourner. You believe your cause is lost. Elias didn't answer. The truth of the statement was self-evident. The being of light then turned its featureless face from one to the other, a gesture that was somehow perceptible despite its lack of eyes. You are both wrong. Your story is not over. It is about to begin. The hegemony was a flawed, arrogant empire, a relic of a younger, more brutal galactic age. But your response, your silent blight, has sent a wave of terror through this galaxy that is destabilizing the very fabric of reality. You have replaced a slow, creeping poison with a cataclysm. The being paused, letting the weight of its words settle. We have brought you here not to judge you, but to offer you a choice. The hegemony is fracturing. In the wake of your attacks, old hatreds are re-emerging. Power vacuums are being filled by warlords and fanatics. The peace they maintained, however flawed, is collapsing. The galaxy is on the brink of a dark age, a war the likes of which has not been seen for 1,000,000 of your years. It gestured with a hand of light, and the white void behind it shimmered. Images appeared, projected into their minds. They saw fleets of warships clashing over burning planets, cities turned to rubble, entire species being herded into extermination camps. It was a vision of hell, a galaxy tearing itself apart. This is the future you have created, the Sentinel's voice said, its tone not accusatory, but deeply sad. But it is not the future that must be. We are offering you a new purpose. Your ship, the Anvil, is the most powerful weapon in this galaxy, but its ability to manipulate time can be used to build as well as to destroy. You have a choice. You can remain here, in this pocket of nothingness, until your ship decays and your descendants forget there was ever a sun. Or you can become something more. You can become arbitrators, peacemakers. You can use your terrible weapon to enforce a new kind of peace. Not through erasure, but through intervention. You can become the guardians this galaxy so desperately needs. Rostova stared, speechless. The idea was unthinkable. To save the descendants of her jailers, to police the very galaxy that had condemned her people to a living death, it went against every fiber of her being. Elias, however, saw something else. He saw a path forward, a way to redeem themselves, a way to turn their instrument of vengeance into an instrument of hope. It was a slim, improbable chance, but it was the first real choice they had been given in 800 years. We accept, so, Elias said, speaking for them both, for all of humanity. Rostova spun on him, her eyes blazing. You do not speak for me, traitor. He speaks for your future, the Sentinel replied. Your past is a cage of your own making. Commander, it is time to learn how to open the door. With that, the being of light and the vision of the war-torn galaxy faded, leaving them once again alone in the observation deck, staring at their own reflections in the dark, silent walls of their ship, adrift in a sea of impossible choices. The Sentinel had given them a new mission. Now, they had to decide if they were still enemies, or if they could become partners in a future neither of them had ever imagined. The Sentinel's proposition hung in the silent, sterile air of the observation deck, a concept so fundamentally alien it seemed to bend reality around it. It was not a command, not a threat, but an invitation, and that made it infinitely more terrifying. Rostova's fury, which had been a white-hot nova of righteous indignation, did not simply vanish. Instead, it cooled, condensing from a raging fire into a dense, cold singularity of disbelief and profound, soul-deep violation. Peacemaker's guardians, the words were a bitter acid on her tongue, a grotesque parody of the sacred mission that had been forged in the dark, desperate crucible of Bunker Gamma 7. She turned on Elias, her entire being radiating a cold, compressed fury. It was the pressure of 1,000 years of remembered suffering. "This is your doing," she said, her voice a low, venomous whisper that cut through the silence. "You found the one crack in our resolve, and you hammered a wedge into it. You whispered our weakness to them, and in return, they have offered us a gilded cage to replace the iron one the hegemony built. You call this a future? It's a leash." Elias met her gaze without flinching, his own exhaustion and terror overshadowed by a flicker of something she hadn't seen in him before. Resolve. "They offered us a purpose beyond vengeance, Ava. All you have ever offered is a beautifully written, perfectly justified ending. An ending for them, and an ending for us. Because after the last hegemony world went dark, what would we have become? What would have been left of us but the shape of our weapon, their standoff, a clash of ideologies that defined the past and future of humanity, was interrupted not by another pronouncement from the void, but by a subtle, jarring shift in the ship's internal physics. A low hum, the first sound any of them had heard since their capture, vibrated through the deck plates, a resonant note of returning reality. The featureless white outside the viewport dissolved, not fading, but shattering, and with a nauseating lurch that felt like falling through eternity. The stars slammed back into view. They were in real space again, not in the Corvus system, not in the nebula where they had been hiding. The primary star chart on the tactical display, flickering back to life, showed they were on the fringe of the Hydrus sector, a volatile, lawless region of space known for its asteroid mining colonies and nests of pirates. The Sentinel had not merely released them, it had placed them. Real alarms, shrill and insistent, began to blare across the bridge. A junior officer's voice, tight with anxiety, crackled over the ship-wide comm. "Commander, we're receiving multiple overlapping distress calls on hegemony emergency frequencies. The independent colony on Hydrus Thors is under heavy attack. Warlords, a faction identifying as the Children of the Veil. They've breached the orbital defenses. Dear God, they're rounding up the populace. The Children of the Veil." The name was a dagger of irony twisted in Rostova's gut. They were not aliens. They were human, descendants from one of the outer colonies that had collapsed into barbarism after the interdiction. now twisted by 800 years of hardship into brutal marauders. They preyed on anyone weaker than themselves, their ships cobbled together from scrap, their flag a stylized, weeping earth. They were the very dregs of humanity's suffering, a cancerous byproduct of the hegemony's crime, now inflicting that same suffering on others. The Sentinel had not just given them a choice, it had given them a test. And the test was a dark mirror of themselves. Rostova strode onto the command deck, her authority returning to her like a familiar, heavy mantle. The crew, shaken and disoriented, looked to her, their training battling the sheer impossibility of what they had just experienced. Their eyes asked the question she was furiously asking herself. What now? Status of the attackers, she demanded, her voice cutting through the lingering confusion. 3 repurposed heavy freighters, heavily armed with black market plasma cannons. They've disabled the colony's defense grid and are landing troops. The tactical officer, Gian, reported, his fingers flying across his console. Hydrus Vur is primarily a Xylan settlement. Peaceful, minimal military presence. They won't last an hour. Our weapon systems, Rostova asked, her voice dangerously calm, a dangerous glint returning to her eye. Online. Commander, the weapons officer confirmed. The chronal emitters are fully charged and ready for deployment. Elias had followed her onto the bridge. He stood at the back, a silent, watchful presence. He could feel the old familiar energy building in the room, the cold resolve, the clinical preparation for annihilation. Rostova was defaulting to her programming. She was about to do what she had always done, identify the obstacle and remove it from the timeline. She would erase the children of the Veil, their ships, their soldiers, and in doing so, she would prove the Sentinel wrong. She would prove that humanity's only answer to a brutal universe was a more perfect, more absolute brutality. Target their vessels, Rostova commanded, her voice ringing with the grim finality of a judge passing sentence. Prepare to deploy the field. Erase them from this sector. Commander, wait! Elias's voice cut through the tense silence of the bridge. Every head turned to him, the traitor, the man who had brought this chaos upon them. Rostova fixed him with a lethal glare, her patience worn to a microscopic thread. You have no voice here. Archivist, you forfeited that right when you conspired with the enemy. They are not the enemy, not our enemy, Elias pressed, walking forward with an urgency that defied her authority until he stood beside her command chair. They are human, brutal, yes, vicious, cruel monsters, perhaps, but they are a part of what we're supposed to be fighting for. They are the living consequence of the hegemony's crime, the same crime that created us. If your first act as a guardian is to erase the broken, tormented children of our own past, then the Sentinel was wrong. Then we are nothing but a weapon, and we deserve to be left in that white void forever. Rostova's hand was clenched so tightly on the arm of her chair that the metal creaked in protest. The logic of his words was an infuriating distraction from the simple, clean clarity of her mission. And what is your grand solution? Elias, shall we write them a sad poem about their tragic history while they slaughter the colonists on the ground? We are an instrument of justice. They are committing an atrocity. The equation is simple. Elias pointed not at her, but at the weapons control panel, his eyes alight with a desperate, brilliant idea. The equation is simple because you refuse to see the complexity. That field doesn't just accelerate time forward, it manipulates it. The theory has always been there, buried in the original designs, deemed inefficient for our primary purpose. We can project a localized stasis bubble, a pocket of frozen time. We don't have to unmake them. Ava, we can just stop them, freeze their ships, their soldiers, their weapons, in a single, harmless moment, neutralize the threat without a single death. The concept was so radical, so contrary to their entire doctrine, that it stunned the bridge into silence. The crew stared, first at Elias, then at their commander. The anvil was a tool of endings. Using it to preserve, to pause, was a paradigm shift that felt like blasphemy. It was like asking a guillotine to perform surgery. Rostova looked from the burning conviction in Elias's face to the tactical display. She saw the icons of the marauder ships, a plague of their own making, and she saw the flickering life signs of the colony below, innocent lives caught in a historical feud they had no part in. A demonstration, Elias said quietly, his voice now a plea not to her emotions, but to her strategic mind. We are being watched, Ava, by the Sentinels, by the galaxy. This is not just a battle, it's a statement of intent. Erase them, and we prove we are nothing more than what the hegemony feared. We become a predictable, manageable threat. But stop them, non-lethally, with a power no one has ever seen before, and we become something else entirely. We become an enigma. We become arbiters. Show the galaxy and the Sentinels that we are not just a hammer. Show them we can be a shield. That is true power, not the power to end life, but the power to choose to preserve it. For a long, agonizing moment, Rostova was silent. The entire bridge seemed to hold its breath. She was a woman raised in a bunker, fed on stories of vengeance and loss. Her entire life had been a straight, unwavering line pointed at the heart of her enemies. Now, Elias had shown her a different path, a branching possibility that terrified her more than any enemy fleet. It required not strength, but restraint. It required not certainty, but wisdom. She closed her eyes. In the darkness, she saw not the faces of her dead ancestors demanding retribution, but the serene, featureless face of the Sentinel. Your past is a cage. Commander, it is time to learn how to open the door. Was this the key? She opened her eyes, and the war within her was over. Recalibrate the emitters, she ordered. Her voice was firm, betraying none of the seismic shift that had just occurred within her soul. Isolate the attackers' vessels and their deployed ground forces. Project a temporal stasis field. Duration indefinite. A collective, silent gasp swept through the bridge. Jean, the tactical officer, stared at her for a half-second, his expression one of pure shock, before a look of profound, determined relief washed over his face. Yes, Commander, recalibrating now. A wave of focused, energetic activity swept through the bridge. The crew moved with a renewed purpose, their actions no longer those of cold, efficient executioners, but of skilled, life-saving surgeons. From the spine of the anvil, there was no flash of light, no visible beam of energy, just a silent, invisible wave of altered physics that washed over the battle raging at Hydrastath. On the surface of the colony, the brutal conquerors of the Children of the Veil suddenly froze mid-stride, their snarls of triumph locked on their faces. Their plasma bolts hung inert in the air, inches from their targets. Their dropships, descending on columns of fire, simply stopped, suspended in the sky like grotesque monuments to their own aggression. The entire conflict was over before it had truly begun, encased in a perfect, silent bubble of frozen time. Minutes later, a message came from the colony's government. Hesitant and fearful at first, then bursting with incredulous, tearful gratitude. They didn't know who their saviors were. They only knew that a ghost had appeared in their sky and imposed a perfect, impossible peace upon their would-be destroyers. On the bridge of the anvil, no one cheered. The weight of what they had just done was too immense, too revolutionary. They had changed their very nature. They had looked into the abyss of their own past, saw its reflection in the children of the Veil, and instead of destroying it, had chosen to contain it. They had turned their sword into a shield, their curse into a tool of profound and terrible grace. Elias stood beside Rostova, looking out at the starfield. They were not friends. The chasm between them, carved by 800 years of pain and ideology, was too vast to be bridged so easily. But for the first time, they were no longer enemies. They were partners, bound by a new, terrifying, and sacred duty. What now? Archivist Rostova asked quietly. The question was not a challenge, but a genuine inquiry. It was a concession of leadership, an admission that the old maps were useless now. Now, Elias said, a faint, weary smile touching his lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. We listen. The galaxy is screaming, and for the first time, we have the power to do more than just make it quiet. We remember what it means to build, instead of to burn. The starship Anvil hung in the silence of space, its purpose remade. It was still a ghost, a void within the void, but it was no longer the silence of the grave. It was the silence of the watchman, the guardian, waiting patiently for the next cry in the dark. It was ready to answer, not with a swift and terrible ending, but with a pause, a choice, and the breathtaking, improbable chance for a new beginning. Humanity's long, vengeful night was over. Their vigil had just begun.